why don't we kick it off with you, Grandma? Why don't you just state your name, and then the your birth date, and could you also just describe your mother, your entire family? Um,
Hi, I'm Beth Brubaker. I was born September 7th, 1939. At this day, I am 83 years old. I grew up in a family of three children. I was the oldest. I had a brother who was 2 years, 9 months younger than I, and a sister who was 2 years, 9 months younger than my brother. And we always had great fun joking about how precise this all was.
My name is Dick Brubaker, and I was born May 28th, 1933. Today is my 90th birthday. Uh, I grew up in a family also of three children. I had an older brother who was 5 years older than I, and I had a younger brother who was 6 years younger than I. Um,
what is one of the earliest memories of your childhood that you can just recall?
Okay. I actually remember quite vividly December 7th, 1941, which was the day that Pearl Harbor was bombed. I was I was a little over 2 years old, and I know that sounds young to have a memory, but when I explain it, I think you'll understand as I understand it. We got the news that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And like so many people, my parents went over to my dad's parents' house because I'm sure they had the urge to be with family and to discuss what was happening. And I remember standing in the kitchen in my grandma and grandpa's house very distinctly. I started to cry after they had talked for a while. And they asked me what was wrong. And I said, I don't want the war to come to my house. And even at that young age, I think the reason it is such an embedded memory is because of the emotional aspect of the conversation. And those kind of things stick with you.
um, well, I too grew up with not fond memories, but memories of Pearl Harbor Day. Uh, Prior to that, though, the period of the 30s was a Great Depression, and I can remember that I, as a young child, didn't feel anything particularly uh, bad about that, other than I do remember my father didn't lose his job, but lost, I think he lost hours of work and had to end up cutting wood and selling wood, apparently to supplement our income. As far as Pearl Harbor is concerned, I remember it because it happened on a Sunday, and our local newspaper it made a special Sunday edition with the headlines "Pearl Harbor Bombed." I happened to be the one who picked that special edition up off of the front porch. Um, to me, the headline didn't mean much, but obviously it meant something to my parents.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, Pearl Harbor was the start of World War II. Do you guys remember um, just kind of the general atmosphere of the country during those, like, kind of very critical historical period years, or were you sort of oblivious to kind of the wartime effort, I guess?
I have memories that took place during the war without really understanding what it was all about. But I remember my mother collecting grease, cooking oil, and I guess mainly cooking oil and things like that. And we took it to a local, I think it was a butcher shop where they were a spot where people could take it. That, and I assume that had something to do with the wartime effort. And I also remember we had to have these special tickets called ration cards to buy gasoline.
Well, of course, I was in the early teen years, and so there's lots of things I can remember. In those days, the only way to get news was through the newspaper, or they would have news reels at the local theater. And I can remember seeing some behaviors in the military that the Japanese, particularly when they were invading China, were particularly brutal treatment of young children. The other thing, which is on the lighter side, is I can remember that we had no chocolate candy to speak of, and our local grocer that we used regularly, whenever he got a box of candy bars, he would always put it under his counter and give it to his favorite customers.
I guess during these, did you feel any particular excitement about the war, or were you pretty aware that it was a brutal affair? But like as a young teen, was there any maybe romanticization of what was going on in Europe?
Well, I had my very favorite uncle. His name was Gordon Molson. He was in the Navy. And while he was deployed, my aunt, his wife, and my mother's sister moved in with us. And she had a baby during that time. And I remember rocking that baby back and forth in the bassinet. That was my job, to keep the baby happy. And I always worried about my Uncle Gordon because I really wanted him to come home. And I remember he did come home on leaves a couple of times. And I remember getting all dressed up and sitting on our front porch and waiting for his taxi cab, because he was very special to me, and he was throughout my life.
I don't know that I, as a young boy in my early teens, had thought a great deal about the war. I knew it was going on, but I do remember the day that the war in Europe ended, which was May 8th, 1944. And we were visiting in a little town where my father had a cousin who was a farmer. But anyway, I remember going to this little town which had a square in the middle, and that's where everybody gathered to celebrate VE Day.
Okay. Do you guys both remember V-Day very fondly?
I don't remember it at all.
What's that?
VE Day. For some reason, I don't. That is a blank in my mind.
Well, as I say, I remember, yeah, I'm not so sure I had a full understanding of what it meant, because I would have been in 1944, I would have been 11 or 12 maybe. But I do recall that the whole town gathering together in the town square.
Do you guys remember the dropping of the atomic bomb?
I don't.
I don't think I had any idea of the immensity of the damage it caused.
No.
Ironically, later in life, Beth and I visited Japan, and we went to the Hiroshima location.
Memorial. Yeah.
And they had a three-dimensional relief map of the city after the bomb had exploded. That was an eye-opening to see how much destruction had been done.
I remember feeling uncomfortable while we were there at that memorial, because we were the only Caucasians. Our daughter Linda was with us, and it was full of Japanese children who were on field trips from school, and we were the only Caucasians, and it felt like uncomfortable.
I guess moving away from some historical stuff and kind of back to your sort of family life, starting with you, Grandma, how would you just describe your mother?
My mother? My mother was one of the best hostesses I have ever known. And I've had other people tell me that visiting at our home taught them as well how to be a hostess. My friend Joan, who was my closest friend growing up, to this day will say everything she learned about having guests, she learned from my mom. And I did too. And my daughters have said that they have learned to be hostesses for gatherings at their home, learning from me. And I feel very good about that. And my mother was a wonderful cook. She had lots of friends. I remember doing things with her. I remember her working in the garden. This one memory. My mom and dad were both really avid gardeners, and we had a beautiful yard. And my mother had spent the morning planting these little marigold plants in our rock garden. And she went inside to make lunch, I think, and I pulled them all up, sadly, while she was making lunch. And she came out and said, "What did you do?" And I said, "Well, I just pulled them up to see if they were growing." And I don't know if I really thought that or it was just one of those naughty things. I really don't know.
Well, my mom was a very gentle lady,
Yes.
but at the same time, extremely hardworking, extremely dependable, extremely honest. I can honestly say that probably I didn't appreciate her as much as I should have growing up. But we were, myself and my brothers never, always were well cared for. And the interesting thing, both of my parents were not well educated. In fact, neither one of them finished high school. And yet, in terms of living an effective life, they demonstrated fully able. They didn't have to be well educated to live a fully effective life.
I guess then also going, how would you describe your father?
Oh, my dad.
And then could we also get his name?
Pardon?
Could we get his name as well?
Oh, my dad's name was Walford Charles Johnson, and he went by Wally. And Wally was very gregarious. He had friends all over the place, and he loved people, and people loved him. And our own children have very fond memories of him. My mother had died before he did, several years. And they always got a kick out of him. He worked for many years at the Brock Candy Company. And I don't know if you remember in grocery stores, I don't think they do anymore, but they used to have these bins of candy. And it was called Pick-a-Mix. And you could take a bag and sort through the candy and take what you wanted. He was the originator of that idea while he worked at the Brock Candy Company. So we were always proud to say when we were in the grocery store, my dad. Yeah, that was his idea. But on the other side of the issue, he would come to visit us when all of our children were small. And he would always bring a big bag of candy with him. And there was no stopping the kids from really diving into that, which was, I guess they're all healthy and it must have been okay. But he was also an avid rose grower. And he worked in the city of Chicago, went downtown every day, and he would dress up in a suit. And every morning in the summer, he would go out and cut a rose bud and put it in his lapel. And that was one of his trademarks. And our son Scott, when he had his own home in Arizona, grew roses in honor of Wally. So that was a heartwarming thing for me.
My father grew up as a boy on a farm. And when he was 13, his father was killed in a horse breaking accident, and he and his mother and sisters had to move to town. He so he was very. I always when he grew up, he would wear a suit and a tie anytime he had an opportunity to do so. Mm-hmm. One of my parents' favorite fun things to do was was dancing, what they call round dancing. And during the war, it was very, very common. This was that they would, on Saturday night, there would be gatherings at the dance hall, and I can recall how enthusiastic he was, and my mother also. The sad thing is that not too long in his life, he began to lose his hearing, and those were the early days of hearing aids, but that prevented him from going to the war, but he never lost his zest to dress up. He loved to dress up.
Tell him about you sleeping on the coats.
Pardon?
When you would be taken.
Probably today this would be not thought of positively, but my older brother and I when they would go to dances, it was usually on a Saturday night, and usually there was a theater, and we would go to a movie, and then when the movie was over, we would come up, and the dances lasted well into the evening, and they would put coats on two chairs, and we would lay down and we would go to sleep on these coats on the chairs.
I think this segues actually well into the next question. Is there anything you think they did particularly well in raising you and your siblings?
They gave me, all of us, a very strong love of family. And most of our gatherings at our home were family members. And that's they had lots of other friends too, as they grew older. But when I was young, my fondest memories in the summer were when we'd have family come over and we'd have picnics in the yard. And they had a couple of these galvanized tubs. I don't know really what they were for, but they were probably about 2 feet high, maybe not quite that high, handles on the side, and they would fill them up in the morning and leave them out in the sun, and that was our pools. And I remember it was such a big deal that when the water was finally warm, we could swim as much as anyone could swim in a galvanized tub. But that was a very fun memory. That combined with they would turn on the sprinkler and we would run through that. So we didn't have pools that we went to in those days, but we had our own special pools.
I too grew up in a very closely knit family, and it was very, very common for us to have Sunday dinner with 2 or 3 members of, particularly my mother's family, because they lived close by. But we talk about appetizers. Appetizers in my growing up days was 2 stacks of white bread on each end of the table with bowls of jelly by each one.
Sounds like a good appetizer.
Yeah. Did your parents? Would you say family then was one of the great things they instilled in you?
I'm sorry.
Would you would say family was one of the great?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in my case, my mother passed away early in the early 50s, and my father since he had lost his hearing, he obviously it was a kind of a lonely last few years, yes. But he always maintained his chipper and was always available to us.
Mm-hmm. I remember when his dad came to live with us because he wasn't well. He had the beginnings of was it esophageal cancer? Mm-hmm. But it was the early stages. But he needed to have food special and things like that. And our daughter Dana was very little at the time, but she loved to sit on his lap or next to him and talk to him. And Dana liked to talk. And she could have a ready audience with Grandpa because he really couldn't hear her, but he was always kind of nodding. And so she had an audience to talk to all the time. And it was very interesting to see that. She has memories of that.
Is there anything when you look back that you think they kind of did poorly? That you maybe kind of...
A little louder.
Is there anything when you look back at your childhood that you think your parents did poorly? Or maybe that's something that you tried to rectify when raising your kids?
Well, I would say I was given power, if that's the right word. My father would always say things like, "You made your mother sad," or "That made your mother mad." And so I realized that I had to always say the right thing so my mother wouldn't get upset. And I don't think that was a very good way. She would get her hurt feelings and would close herself in her room, which was uncomfortable for all of us. And I did a better job with our children. Not perfect, but I wish that my mother had been the kind of mother, and I was a little better, been the kind of mother where they could tell me anything without me flying off the handle, and listening and being patient and discussing, what are we going to do about this? I really would like to be able to have a do-over for that.
Well, I think probably the most difficult thing that was present in our home was my father's loss of hearing. And that did two things. One is we had very little conversation growing up. And I'm not so sure that I didn't carry that over to my fatherhood, that I wasn't used to sitting down and having conversations, particularly with my sons. The other hand was my mother had to take over really the management of the family, and well, she did it and did very well with it. We moved to the farm when I was 13. My dad had been raised on a farm, but had moved to town when he was 13, and when he was 47, 1940, no, he would have been about 47. We moved to a farm, and my mother, who was not raised on a farm, had to take over the business aspect, and she did it very well, but she didn't like it.
Right. And they were both very, very fearful of any debt.
Yeah.
I remember that was, any debt was a real burden to them.
Do you guys, seeing how you were raised and in the time period, is there anything, maybe just discuss some of the major differences between how kids are raised now versus when you guys were growing up? And maybe starting with just, is there anything that you see positive in your time that maybe children are lacking now?
Oh, if I had it to do over, this might be an overstatement, I would never spank a child. I was spanked a lot when I was a kid, and they would use a wooden spoon, and I would be laid over a lap, and that was how things were then. And we did spank our children, but if I had to do over, I wouldn't. I would use the thought to me of me striking a child is just awful. And I know my own kids do other things, and I don't know that they spank. I just don't know, but I don't think it's a big deal. They have timeout chairs. Let's talk about what this behavior is like. Things like that. So if I had my way to go back and another do-over, I wouldn't spank.
Gotcha.
Well, I think I alluded to the fact that I wasn't one to have conversation, and definitely I would change that. I think our children have gone through that okay, but I think even if you ask them today, they would have probably liked to have had a closer relationship with me than they had.
Okay.
They do now.
Is there anything that from your childhood you wish you could have given your children? Maybe any experiences, anything unique to the times when you grew up?
I'll say
Is there anything from kind of your childhood that you wish you could give your grandchildren? Any like experiences?
You mean our children?
Let's say grandchildren, actually, in this
Oh,
time.
grandchildren.
Yeah, just given the kind of contrast between when you guys grew up and when they're growing up.
I have very fond memories of my grandmother reading fairy tales and nursery rhymes to me. And to this day, I can tell you at least the Little Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel, those kind of fairy tales I can still remember and talk about. And I loved nursery rhymes, and to this day I know many of them. But just to help you understand what kind of a little girl I was at times, there's this nursery rhyme that goes like this. There was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead, and when she was good, she was very, very good, but when she was bad, she was horrid. And they would say that to me, because I remember I was not an easy child a lot of the time. I remember when our grandson Sullivan first was homeschooled via the internet and his mother. I had reason to. He was studying fairy tales at the time, and I said, I would love to come over and read him fairy tales. And so I went over one time, and I had bought a book of them, and I read to Sullivan, and he seemed to enjoy it very much. And when I got home, Elizabeth said, his mom, Sullivan would like to know if it could be a regular thing. So I did go over for several weeks on a Monday or a Tuesday, I don't remember, and read fairy tales to him. But then his workload got higher in school, or a little busier, and we had to stop that. But he has fond memories of that.
I had no grandparents. All my grandparents passed away before I came to know them. Most of them, several, as a result of the flu epidemic in the early 1900s. So I have no memories of grandparents, and it's definitely I shouldn't say a void because I had no experience. I didn't know that I was missing something.
Well, I was told by our daughter Sarah that she came home one day from being at our neighbor girl's house and said, this girl was Kristen. She came home and said, Kristen is so spoiled. Her grandma comes to visit and brings her presents. And I said, oh, she's not spoiled. That's just what grandmas do. And like my husband, our children did not have grandparents because they all died so young. And so from that moment on, I instituted a thing that I would do called giving grandma gifts. They were gifts that weren't for birthday. They weren't for anything else other than, there's no reason for this, but I bought a gift and it would be a grandma gift.
That's good.
Kind of moving into sort of the teenage and adolescent years, what was one of the first jobs you guys had as a child?
mean chores or outside my home?
Say employment outside your home.
My first job with a paycheck was working at a department store at a mall. It was called the Fair Store. And my closest friend, Joan, and I went and applied and got hired right away. And we were working in the purse department. And I remember being so excited we were making $1.10 an hour. And this was just wonderful. And I was able to use that money any way I wanted to. But when I look back, I wish that I had been taught how to save it and learn how to budget and things like that. And I never did. And my husband will be the first to tell you that. And I think that would have been a good teaching moment, but that didn't happen. And I've had to learn that from him.
My first job was a paper boy, and in those days, you usually had paper boys had bicycles, and they had a bag which you roll the papers up and put in, and you go down the street and you'd throw them on the porches. And then on Saturday, you had to go and knock on everyone's door and get paid for the week's delivery. So, and you had a card which you punched showing that they had paid for it. But anyway, my first job was a paper boy.
Did you learn anything from that experience? Do you think that gave you any kind of particular traits or lessons?
Well, I would have to say probably I learned not to like being a paper boy. Actually, I only did it in the summers because in the school years I didn't do it. But I remember, I guess I didn't like the idea of having to be disciplined, that I had to be at a certain place at a certain time and I had to do certain things. And on Saturday I had to collect the money, which was probably an indication that later on I was not well organized all the time.
Yes, no.
I guess actually this goes well into the next question. As you sort of entered your teenage years, how would you describe yourself? If that's possible. And take your time.
I was not a good student in high school. And I'm not sure why. My parents didn't stress, working hard and working hard in school. And I got mainly C's in high school and did very poorly in math. Numbers and I just don't work well together. And but the funny thing is I can memorize with very little effort strings of numbers. I know our credit card number, including the CVC and the expiration date, and we've had to change credit cards from time to time, and I have no problem immediately learning that. But when you come to addition or subtraction no, it doesn't work well in my mind.
School came easy to me. Although I wouldn't say that I was a dedicated student, but it did come easy. So I was able to have good grades without necessarily working that hard. I think the biggest problem with my education is that when I was in 8th grade, we moved, and I came from a city environment into a rural environment, small high school, and I was kind of the outsider. And but I did well and acclimated well, but even though I had fairly good grades, I was a little bit of a lazy student.
Did you start playing sports around this time? Start playing softball?
Well, actually, sports was a big part of my life. Started in the 5th grade, and I played basketball in the 5th grade all the way through junior high. I started to play football in junior high school, and played all through high school, and later in college I played football and basketball in college.
Grandma, did you play any sports in throughout school?
I liked field day kind of sports. We would have a field day every day, every year toward the end of the school year. And I was a very fast runner in those days. That certainly didn't last, but I remember being very fond of the running races, but not being in anything else. No, I did not do sports outside of school, and I don't think I'm very good at sports. I'm not. They don't come naturally to me. Running, of course, did, and so other than running. No, I wouldn't say I'm an athlete.
Would you have described yourself as like introverted or extroverted during these kind of teenage years?
I would say this I've learned as an adult. I don't know if I was conscious of it in high school, but I have learned that I'm pretty much. Dick and I took these tests called the Myers-Briggs, where you end up with four letters out of 8. And the interesting thing is I'm 4 letters and he's the other 4 letters. But anyway, it turned out there I'm almost exactly introvert and extrovert.
Yeah, I think that's called ambivert.
Yes, half and half. Because I love to be with people, but then all of a sudden I get over peopled and then I need a break. But I do like to be with people, but it can get old. Although this past weekend we were with our entire extended family for 3 days, I never got tired of it. Yeah.
Well, even today when I look back, I realize that I was very much an introvert. Probably didn't know what the word introvert or extrovert meant until I was well into adulthood. But now, as I see it, it's easy for me to be alone. And that's something, that's a new revelation for me just in recent years, is how much of an introvert I had been.
As you kind of were growing up, did you see your friendships change at all? At any point were you with some of the same people throughout that, or did you see yourself maybe gravitate towards different people as you were growing up? Or maybe like an identity change in some ways?
Well, my closest friend in childhood, I'd say starting in 2nd grade, I met my friend Joan in 2nd grade. And she went to a Lutheran school, and when it came time to join Girl Scouts, it was called Brownies at first. They didn't have it at St. Andrews where she went to school, so she came over to our public school to go to Brownies. And that's when we met. And that's when our friendship started. And it didn't get real close until high school. And we were very good friends in high school. And in fact, we're still friends to this day.
Well, of course, first of all, I changed schools different times. So, no, I'd have to say that I don't have any. Of course, most of my friends have passed away, but I still have a couple of friends that I have maintained relationships from college, but we're far apart. They live on the West Coast, and so that there isn't much time we spend together.
But your softball friends.
Well,
Do you remember what you wanted to be when you grew up at around that age?
I really struggled with that. Basically, I always wanted to be a mother. And when I went to college, I'm a child of the 50s. I graduated from high school in 1957. And in those days, girls were primarily nurses or teachers. And knew I didn't want to be a nurse because I was not that great with science. And so I studied elementary education and became a teacher, although I only taught for 1 year because I was pregnant that whole year, and that put an end to that. And then from then on, I was a stay-at-home mom and worked outside the home occasionally with our own business when Dick needed me during a busy season.
No, I didn't have, I had no idea of what I wanted to do, and didn't really find my place until I was well into my 30s. And but as I've looked back, and I've told Beth many times, I feel like I ended up just about where I needed to be.
I call that providential. And that is very true, because he really hit his stride when he started his own business. Yeah.
In your teenage years, do you remember kind of like idolizing or really admiring any particular person?
Idolizing what?
Just any, did you have any particular idols or someone who you really admired, whether they be, you know, a parent, you know, an older person, or just a celebrity?
No, I can't remember. Well, in high school, I went to a club called Young Life, and I had one Young Life leader whose name was Bill Starr, and he was the most godly man I've ever met, and we became close friends, and Dick and I became close friends of his until the day he died. And he, I would have to say, would be close to what I would call an idol. But I can't think of any females. But Bill Starr stands out.
Well, I would have to second that, because Bill was very influenced in my life. I met him through Beth, and he just was a man that you just couldn't help but love.
Yes. And he actually did a service for Dick and I when we renewed our vows. I don't remember exactly what year that was, but it was in Phoenix because Bill lived there. And we went to our son Scott's house and his wife Chrissy and renewed our vows with Bill. And that was very special. And he also, when our son Scott got married to Chrissy, he was the person who officiated for their wedding.
Moving away from being a godly person, were you ever rebellious in your teenage years? Were you rebellious at all in your teenage years? Did you sneak out? Did you have to sneak away from your parents to drink or?
I never drank in high school. I had friends that did, but my family all around were teetotalers. And I knew, I mean, it never appealed to me, for one thing, because of growing up like that. I suppose it could have gone the other way, but no, I never wanted to drink. But I did have a boyfriend, and he would pick me up to go to Young Life. This is a story that my children may know or may not. And they were always at Young Life, met at different houses. And this one time we could not find the house where the Young Life meeting was going to be, and it got too late. So we parked and made out instead. And then from then on, he would pick me up from Young Life, and we never went to Young Life.
Grandpa, did you have a similar rebellious streak?
Well, I don't know whether I had I was a one who pushed the limits.
Okay.
But not to the extent that I always wanted to be. I didn't want to offend my parents, but I was willing to go along with the crowd. But I never got to the point where it became out of control. All during my high school. First of all, you had no money, so we lived on the farm, and so when you live on the farm, you can't be going to Young Life every year. We just had one car, but I had times when I knew I was behaving ways that my mom and dad would prefer me not to behave.
Did you ever break the law, kind of in your teenage years?
The only time I ever knowingly broke the law, a bunch of us, and this was in high school, we decided there was a farm that raised watermelons, and we went in and stole some watermelons, and interestingly enough, we all got caught. And I remember my parents had to pay a $5 fine for me. They never arrested us. They just asked us to remunerate the watermelon grower.
I never heard that one.
We've heard about Grandma's boyfriend. Do you remember your first girlfriend?
Actually, I never had a real girlfriend until I was a senior in college. And this was one girlfriend before I met Beth. And
I knew who she was.
But no, I was a senior and she was a freshman, and so that didn't work out. And she still had 3 years of high school or college left. I got drafted into the Army, but actually, as I say, when I got out of the Army, I actually worked for the college at the time in the admissions department, and when I came back from the Army, I continued to work there, and that's when I met Beth. She was still a student.
So I guess moving into like post high school, where did you guys go to college, and what did you study?
We both went to Cornell College, which is in Mount Vernon, Iowa. And just for the record, Cornell College was the original Cornell, not Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. So just let's get that straight. And it was a very small school at the time, and my friend Joan and I both went there. She was my roommate my freshman year. And lost my train of thought.
What year did you go to Cornell?
1957, I graduated from high school.
Okay.
And so I was the class of 1961 graduating from Cornell. And I met Dick. I had seen him around the campus, and I had gone to a dinner dance in this group I was part of, and he was there with an upper class girl. Mm-hmm. And I somehow assumed that he was a student at the University of Iowa, which was very close by. Mm-hmm. And shortly after that, I just wondered who he was. And not too long after that, I was in the student union, and there was a pool hall at the end of the main room. It had glass windows so you could see into it and see who was playing pool. And I saw him in there playing pool with another guy that I did know. And so I got a girlfriend to go with me, and I said, I want to go in and so I can meet that guy. I want to know who he is. So I asked somebody, who is that? And they said, that's Dick Brubaker. Don't you know him? And I said, well, no. And it turns out that the year I was recruited by Cornell to go there, he was in the Army. Mm-hmm. And the classes above me and below me knew him because he had recruited them. Mm. So I engineered my way into the pool area where I met him, and they invited us to play pool. Mm-hmm. And I had never held a pool cue in my life. And I said, I really don't know how. And he said, well, it's just like geometry. And I knew right away I was dead in the water because I told you about how I was with math. And so I just kind of said, oh, okay. And he helped me learn, but we ended up playing 22 games of pool that day. And I, honest truth, knew that day I would marry him. Yes.
You didn't let me know that.
No, I didn't say, hey, by the way, I'm going to marry you. No, but I knew he was going to call me and ask me to go out that night. It was a Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a date with somebody else, and I was really glad because I didn't want to be that girl who was available on Saturday night.
Gotcha. Okay.
Well, it was actually a miracle that I got to college. As they say, I grew up on the farm. My parents didn't even finish high school. It's not that they didn't want me to continue, but it was just not in the cards. We had no money. I didn't have it wasn't necessarily something that was I thought I would be able to do. And the thing that happened was a good friend of mine who I played basketball with went to Cornell. I didn't know that's where he went, and he was home at the end of the first week of school. He had a girlfriend at home, and we crossed paths in the local bowling alley. And he saw me, and we didn't cross paths in the summer very much because he was a city boy, I was a farm boy. But anyway, he said, why don't you come out to Cornell? Now, this is a week after school started. And I didn't think much about it, but the following Monday, I got a call. He had given my name to the admissions department, and my parents got a telephone call inviting me to come to the college, which we did. And the call came on a Monday. We traveled on a Thursday, and this is the second week of school. It was 92 miles from my hometown to Mount Vernon, Iowa. Furthest I'd ever been away from home. 92 miles. Ironically enough, we interviewed the admission department. They had me fill out an application. They helped me with some aid that allowed me to finance it. I went home the following Monday. I packed up and went back. I started school 2 weeks late, which it's miraculous that I got through. Was at all successful that first year because it was farm boy, not too worldly. Whole new environment. But I will say the one thing that saved me was I played basketball, and the fact this friend of mine was the star of our basketball team, and that he went to school primarily as an interest in basketball. I had played with him, but I didn't have any idea of furthering it. But for 2 weeks, I had 2 weeks of school to make up. And the only thing that gave me a break is that he would invite me along with his friends to go over to the gym and play makeup games. This was in October. You couldn't formally practice. The team couldn't formally practice November 1st, and so I'd go over and fill in and play. Well, the basketball coach, who I didn't even know was the basketball coach, used to come up and watch these games, and I'll never forget the practice. First practice was on November 1st, and the Friday before that, we'd been up there playing, and I was just leaving the gym when the basketball coach, I'll see you on Monday. I said, what is this? Well, anyway, I showed up on Monday, and the rest was history, although I have to give myself credit. He was instrumental in having me go through the rough period until I got established, and I owe a great deal to him. I'm almost sure I would not have finished school without his encouragement.
And he ended up being in the Hall of Fame for basketball at Cornell.
Oh, Gramps.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you've been in multiple halls of fame.
Oh yes, he's very proficient in getting into halls of fame.
Gramps, we just heard about Grandma's version of when you guys first met. Can I hear yours?
Well, I think first of all, I did call her up. Actually, I was a member of the admission staff, and so I traveled from Monday till Friday. I was traveling, visiting high schools. I think I called you on Sunday, not on Saturday.
No, it was Saturday.
Okay. Anyway, but I didn't ask her out for Saturday. I asked her out for dinner when I got back from my trip, and we had our first date on the following Saturday, and we went to dinner at a supper club in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and actually we hit it off pretty right from the beginning.
Yeah.
I can remember meeting her parents for the first time, and that was an interesting experience. But thankfully, her dad became one of my best friends.
Yeah.
Wally, he and I just somehow we became good friends, and her mother I always remember was a great cook, and I felt accepted by them right from the beginning,
Well,
which helped.
When I first told my mother, I knew that I really liked him, and it was still early on. And my mom asked, well, how old is he? I was 19. I was 19, and he was 25. And she said, Beth, he's kind of old for you. You know, he's probably been around. And I thought, he still hasn't been around.
I grew up in a small world and stayed there.
Yeah. And so that was never an issue. But my mother grew to love him very much and respected him. Our whole family did. But I have to tell this thing. Dick was a golfer. He liked to play golf. And my parents were members of a very nice country club called Medina Country Club. It's very famous in the golf world. And my dad invited him to go to Medina and play golf. And that was his first experience at a country club in that environment. And he came home and said to me, I don't know if I can do this. And I said, do what? I didn't know what he was going to say. He said, I can't fit into this world. Because he felt so out of place at Medina. I don't remember how you and I talked about it, and I don't remember how we resolved it, but little by little, you got used to it.
I got used to it.
Yes, it wasn't a hard thing to get used to.
But no, that was here again. I grew up in a very small world, and certainly country clubs were not a part of it. Interesting, but Beth's dad was very patient with me. Didn't know how to dress. Didn't know what to do in the locker rooms. Tipping was not in my whole mind frame. I didn't know what that was, but I survived, and
you learned.
And we have many fond memories of Medina Country Club. Not only me playing golf, but it was a great place to have dinner, and so it wasn't hard for me to get used to.
I grew up hanging around the Medina pool all summer, and that was my mom had a lavender Pontiac convertible, and I remember I drove it a lot, and I would always drive my convertible to Medina and spend the day at the pool, and I thought, wow, I've come from a different world than he has altogether. But we're still married, going on 63 years.
Yeah, it sounds like Grandma knew pretty much from the get-go that she wanted to marry you.
Say that again.
It sounds like Grandma knew pretty much from the get-go that she wanted to marry you. Do you have any particular moment when you realized you wanted to marry Grandma?
I don't know that I could specify a moment. I obviously grew very fond of her very quickly. And probably if there was a question mark anywhere is that she was not at all acquainted with my world. She did not have any experience in farm community, and
how about the bathroom situation?
The farm that we lived on at that time did not have a bathroom, and so she had to acclimate knowing what it is to go to an outhouse. That was a big move for her.
Not a good one.
But worth it.
But shortly after that, the landlord paid for them. There was a room set aside for a bathroom,
Yeah.
but it wasn't, it was like a storage closet at the time. But then they did get running water, and it was easier to go to the farm.
Well, farm life was an eye opener for Beth because it's something that she had never had any.
No.
And I have fond memories. If you recall, my parents moved to the farm when I was 13, so I grew up in the city. And I never really became a farm boy because very shortly after that I left to go to college. But I have fond memories of the farm.
Oh, I do too.
And my dad had left the farm when he was 13 years old, and so it worked in a factory for 29 years. And I still don't know how it all came about that my mom and dad decided that they would rent this farm when I was in high school. But somehow he never missed a beat. He went back to the farm. In those days, it was common to have horses to do the farming with, and he knew how to handle horses. He knew how to harness horses. But anyway, I at the time it didn't register me until much year later. I think back, how in the world did he ever do that? But he never missed a beat.
Whenever we would go and visit, his mom would give me a job to do. She raised chickens and would sell the eggs, and she would collect the eggs, but they all needed to be washed individually before you could put them in the cartons. And so she gave me the job of washing eggs. And so I was the egg washer. And I even went with her to the store. There was a local little tiny grocery store that was in somebody's house. And she would sell the eggs there to this woman. But one of the funniest things about the farm, this is a little getting ahead of ourselves, but our son Brett, who was our oldest, he's the only one that had any memories of the farm. And one of his favorite things, his mom, Dick's mom, would also raise the chickens to eat. And she would get them ready to eat by holding them by the neck and swinging them around and wringing their necks. And Brett was watching her do this, and he came in and he said, the chickens sit on
Rafter bleachers.
Bleachers, and chickens actually have these bars that look like bleachers. And he had grown up being in a softball game so much, so he called them bleachers, which we thought was very funny. And he also he said, I want to go watch Grandma kill chickens. It's not the usual thing you hear from your son.
Did you enjoy kind of being introduced to the farm life, or was it a rough transition as well?
Well, there were things about it that were rough. I was not used to it. But I grew to love it. I remember one evening we were having dinner, and my mother-in-law pointed out, everything we're eating here tonight came from the farm. I'll never forget that, because we were having chicken, fresh vegetables. She had a vegetable garden, and that was kind of neat. Well, and you have the memory of the angel food cakes.
Well, yeah. We always, not always, but my mom would plan for a very nice Sunday noon dinner. Mm-hmm. And one of the highlights of it was she would go out and pick 13 fresh eggs. I said, I guess you have to have 13 eggs to make angel food. But anyway, she would make an angel food cake, and we would eat the whole thing.
It wasn't a box cake.
No. But no, she was a good cook. She I never felt anything but being well taken care of.
Yeah, but my favorite meal there, to this day, she would make a pot roast in an electric skillet. And she also made homemade noodles. And there'd be noodles hanging all over the place to dry because they have to dry in order to be cooked. And so she would gather these noodles and put them in with the pot roast. And so there'd be gravy and pot roast and noodles. And this was the unbelievable thing. She would serve all of that, pot roast, gravy, noodles, over mashed potatoes. And corn. We would have corn. Talk about a meal filled with carbohydrates. But I'll tell you, it was a yummy meal.
You both are, in your current age, very avid readers. You're both very avid readers.
Yes.
Do you know when that habit started for you guys?
I don't remember exactly when it started, but I think around 6th grade, I happened to read a book that, you read books and you think, but I got a book and it was about a dog. And I could hardly put it down. And that, I think, was the beginning. I wanted to have that experience. Well, Dick he's always got these definitions. He said the definition of joy is doing something that you like so well you can't wait to do it again. That's joy, which I agree is a really great definition. And I think my joy of reading started with that one book. And then, this is getting ahead, but when our oldest son, Brett, was about 12 years old, I would think, maybe 13, a very close friend of ours who played softball with Dick, his name was Terry Muck. And for some reason, he gave Brett a whole set of the Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis. And because they came from Terry, Brett had never been a reader. But because these books came from Terry, who he admired and loved, he started reading the first book. And I noticed him reading this book, and he said, "Mom, this is so cool." He said, in this story, they go to another world, and it takes no time out of this world. He said, you just have to read them. They're so cool. So I thought, any book that's going to get my son to read, I'm going to read them. And from that day forward, they have become my very favorite books, without a doubt. And I think I've instilled that memory into all my grandchildren.
I do remember one of the books that stood out to me as one of the early books that I read, might have even been the first one, was actually during the war, and it was a book called Guadalcanal Diary by a fellow named Ernie Pyle, who was a war correspondent. And I can remember that book being eye-opener because it was about the war. But anyway, I was not a avid reader until quite late in life. And I don't know what is an avid reader? Somebody always has a book open.
Yes.
And I'm pretty close to that now. I'm always in a book.
Had the habit begun in your 20s?
Pardon?
By your 20s, had you started reading regularly?
No, I was not. I read what I had to read.
Gotcha.
I think as we got older, of course we had more time as we got older. And, but now we're always reading. I mean, every day. And I have to say my favorite book is the Bible. But after that, it would be the Chronicles of Narnia. And Dick reads, and I like novels, whereas Dick reads primarily nonfiction.
Well, my favorite genre is historical fiction. But I enjoy that very much. Now I started that doing that way back. I can remember a book called The Exodus, which was
it was about the Jews,
anyway,
the Jews
yeah.
immigrating
But anyway,
to Israel.
I would say reading it came along later in life.
We both love the Michener books, and I still do.
Yeah.
How would you describe your faith, kind of in your
My faith
in your 20s?
in my 20s, probably. I had I gave my life to Jesus as a teenager, probably or before that even, but then there were years where I kind of forgot about it. But it was after I had children that I realized I want them to know about Jesus, and I'd have to say when Brett was a little boy, my faith started to really get serious. And all of our children, we raised our kids with a faith, without question. We did not do it perfectly by any means. Some of them have remained with the faith. Well, I'd have to say, in some respect, they all have a faith, but it's a little different.
It isn't always expressed in the same way.
Right. And I gave them a lot of do's and don'ts. And Elizabeth once said that you never explained why any of these things. And I was glad she said that, because it was an eye opener. You can't just say this is the rule without knowing why, and we never did that. And that I could, another do-over, I would like to go over and do that again. But as I said, my favorite book is the Bible, and I do try to read it every day, and I pray for our entire family, and also special friends of ours who are in our care group from church. And I feel it's very important to pray for the whole family. And I don't always know specifically how to pray for them. So it's pretty much praying for their ongoing interest in knowing Jesus better. Basically, that's it.
So, Graham, if you want to take some time and talk about your faith in your 20s and kind of how that evolved.
Well, my first introduction to the church is as a 5-year-old. I remember going to a kindergarten class at church, and the primary attraction was this was during the Depression, when each of us were giving a half-pint bottle of milk. Now that's the memory I have out of that. Of that event. Later, though, I do recall sitting in the sanctuary with my mother, watching my older brother be baptized. Now, from that time, the faith was not any part of my life really until later, when I met Beth, and it became very important that her faith was very important to her, and that it was going to be necessary for me to understand that and accept that. Out of all of that, I would have to say it would be fair to say that Beth led me to Christ, and I ultimately, she and I were baptized together at our church in Park Ridge. Since that time, I actually have at one time read the Bible from page 1 till page 1600 or whatever it is. I did it kind of as a personal challenge, but I have to say, what did I gain from that was probably very little helpful to my faith. But as time goes on, and we became very involved in our church. I have gone through periods of very intense studying time in the Scripture. In recent years, I've decided to try to reduce things to the simplest things I can. Now, I'd have to say that if someone were to ask how to express my faith today, I would simply say love God, love what God loves, and study the Scripture to find out what God loves.
I guess starting with you, Grandma, have you ever experienced like a crisis of faith?
A little louder.
Have you ever experienced a crisis of faith?
Yes. I did have, during a low point in my life, I told God that I was done with him and that I wouldn't be praying anymore, and I was mad. And but I would find myself praying, and then I would get mad again and say, no, I'm not going to pray because it doesn't work and it's not real. But this kept happening over and over again. And I finally realized that I had to decide, am I going to have faith or am I not going to have faith? And I decided, yes, I was going to have faith, but I was going to have to start over again and get to know God. For a long time, I had the idea of if I gave my life to God, everything would be roses and honey, and that's just not how it is. And God challenges us, and I believe not anything comes to my life without filtering through God. I don't think there's any second causes. So I had to figure out what that meant. And I believe that he gives us faith building times in our life where we can say, okay, I'm going to trust or I'm done. And being done doesn't work for me. So I'm learning to trust more and I don't think you ever stop getting to know God because he's described as what's the word? It's a word that means unknowable. I can't think of what that word is right now. But one time I had an interesting conversation with my grandson Brennan, who he is the son of our oldest child, who is named Brett, who died in 2012. And after Brett died, Brennan really was mad at God because he wanted to know his dad and to be with his dad. And little by little, every once in a while I ask him, how would you describe your faith? And he would say, oh, I'm kind of thinking about it, or, vague things. And most recently when I asked him, he said, well, I'd have to say God and I are dating. I'm just getting to know him all over again. And so I thought, good for you. That's a good way to put it. And Brennan's always very honest with us. And so I thought that was a really good answer.
Grandpa, have you ever experienced a crisis of faith?
Have I ever questioned my faith?
A crisis of faith.
I don't think that I ever got to the point where I would say, as Beth has said, I'm done with you, God. There are times when I have felt that he may have abandoned me, but it hasn't lasted for long. I'm a strong believer that faith in Jesus has a practical and intelligent component to it. It's a smart thing to do, practicing the faith of following Jesus. And now I would take a more, some would say I take a more intellectual approach to it. That's probably consistent with me, rather than an highly emotional taste. But that's who I am.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys ever explore other religious, movements or ideas?
Other faiths?
Yeah, other faiths outside of Christianity.
No. I guess was from my early training of, I don't remember a time in my life when I didn't know that Jesus loved me. It just was part of me. And not that it meant a lot sometimes, but it was this background that I knew that he was loved. And I remember riding my bike one time when I was a little girl, and I was just riding down the street, and I thought, God, can you see me riding my bike right now? So I did think about God when I was little, and I had questions. But like I say, and I've never been taught that God is an angry God or a God who's vindictive. I always knew that he was love. And for that, I'm extremely grateful.
Well, I think no, I've never gone to a period where I felt the need to investigate other forms of faith. Although I believe that people of other faith, many of them can be very sincere, and very God fearing. I don't think that that he's only the God of Christians. But for me, that what Christianity is what I'm very comfortable with.
Yeah, well, you've said many times there's only one God. We believe that there's one God.
Yeah.
And so whether other faiths express themselves differently, it all comes down to how they feel about Jesus, I feel. I think I shouldn't say feel. I believe that based on Scripture as I know it, there's a verse that I like very well. It says there is one God and one mediator, the man Christ Jesus. And I hang on to that.
Kind of segueing from this, did you guys start to become sort of politically active or aware in your 20s at all?
A little louder.
Oh. In your 20s, did you start becoming politically active or aware?
No, I am very. I get my information about political things and news from Dick. And some people can say, well, I should think for myself, but I don't find myself interested terribly in other than the very basic political arena of who's running, and not even on a local level, but on a national level. I find it more interesting. I like to watch debates. I don't always understand all the issues, but in that respect, that's about as politically active as I get. I mean, I'm a voter, so.
I don't think that I had a heavy active or intellectual involvement with politics for many years. I was observing it, and I certainly was aware of but getting involved in political discussions was not something that was high on my list. I think more recently, and partly it's because I do more reading now, and because I have the time to do that, that I have developed more strong political ideas. But I believe, I personally believe that both parties really want the same thing for everyone. They just have different avenues or how to do that. And I have what I think is the proper way, but it doesn't mean that there isn't another way.
Do you feel that the country is more politically divided in our lifetimes than when you guys were growing up?
I don't remember much about politics when I was growing up, but I think, from my point of view, I think the world this country is pretty divided right now, in a lot of ways. But politically, I'd say it's very divided.
I think the big thing is in today's world is that there's so much information out there, and so many more sources for information. The internet, social medias have very definitely made a big impact on how fast you can disseminate information. And as a result of that, I think people have come to develop, more people come to develop discussion and difference of opinion. Yeah, I think we're divided. I've always felt that compromise was a necessary part of democracy, and I think today we have extremes that make compromise and coming together difficult.
And then, kind of would just like to hear about. Do you remember what your first real job out of school was? Or for you, it sounded like you were a teacher for a year.
Oh, after college.
Yeah.
Yes, I was a second grade teacher, and I got hired. I could have been hired by many different school districts because at the time they were really looking for teachers. And we bought a home in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, and when I interviewed there, it made sense to accept the job there. But I had a very poor experience of teaching second grade that year because it was a brand new school which was still not completed when school started. And they had designed this school with folding doors that would divide a large 3-room area into 3 rooms, or be opened different ways they could do it. And those doors had not been delivered when school started. So here I had this little class of second graders in front of me trying to keep their attention while 2 other classes were in the same room. The school district was so new. Elk Grove Village was a new village, a new town at that time. And they had never, at that time, they did not have a teaching syllabus, which ordinarily a teacher would get, that would describe what is to be taught at this grade level and other instructions. And basically they said, here's your class, here's your books. Oh, there were 12 teachers in that school, 9 of whom were right out of college, no experience. The principal was a brand new principal, never had been a principal before. He had been a music teacher. And at the time that school started, his wife was in the hospital dying of a brain tumor. So it seemed like everything was against this being a smooth year. And I got through the year and I enjoyed the students, but I don't think I was as effective as I would have liked to have been because of all these circumstances.
My first job, actually, I was a senior in college, and I got a call to come visit the admissions office. When I went there, I sat down with the director of admissions for the college, and he offered me a job. I said, "Wow, this is good." This was the mid-50s, and there was lots of jobs available. It wasn't a problem of finding a job, but anyway, so I had this opportunity. I snatched it up. Didn't really know what I was doing. My job was to go from high school to high school and introduce potential students to the college. And my first assignment, the first territory I worked in was Chicago. I had never been in the city of Chicago prior to that time. But anyway, I learned my way around, and eventually, after the first year that I went into the Army, I was drafted into the Army. I stayed in the Army for 21 months. I came back, and I worked 3 more years for the college, and it was in that 3-year period that I met Beth. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed the work. I'm not always sure that I knew for sure what I was trying to do, but I got to travel a lot and made a lot of nice new people, and it was introduced to a whole new area of life that I'd never had any experience with.
Your whole work experience, though, I think is a very interesting story.
Is there jobs that followed after that are interesting?
Well, let me. Yes, after Beth and I got married, it was time to move on, and I had actually a friend of Beth's father offered me a job in suburban Chicago, which I took. I've often said this to Beth. I said, I over a period of time I had 5 or 6 jobs. Never once has anybody given me a job description, and I didn't think about it at the time. But now that I think back about that, that made me kind of angry because I was always anxious about what was I expected to do because I didn't know. But anyway, I went to work for this company. I worked for them for I think 2 years. That company was going to be moved, and we decided that I would go back to graduate school, and I did. We went back to Iowa, to the University of Iowa. I took a program, Master's in Business Administration, completed it. We have no idea how we did it.
No.
We had no money. I still don't know exactly how it accomplished.
We had 2 children.
Yeah, we had 2 children, but I completed it. Then I went to work for a major food manufacturer. Stayed there a couple of years, and went to another job. In that job, I was head of marketing and sales for a printing company, and we had a fire on the 4th of July weekend, put the company out of business for several months. I eventually lost my job, and out of that, I started my own little company. Often say I ended up I ended up being exactly where I think I needed to be, but through a very strange path and set of circumstances.
Do you think there was anything that made you a good employee that maybe even put you in that position to be able to, I don't know, build a company out of the ashes of an old?
Well, the experience I had at the gift wrap printing company was essential for the business I had was a gift wrap associated business, so that business experience was very helpful. Obviously, my work at my graduate school work provided me with some tools that were very important, and as I say, as Beth will attest, what I learned about myself is I do best working by myself.
He's a man who works alone.
Yeah, and this really for how many years we built the company grew and we added employees, but basically I ran the business until I retired. I started the business when I was 30 in 1971, so I was about 37 or 8, and I worked until I retired when I was 77.
And we'll tell the history of the.
Well, we ended up selling the business to my daughter Elizabeth, and she ran the business for 4 or 5 years, and then she decided that she didn't want to have the responsibility for the ownership, so she sold the company, and now she works for that same company. The company still exists. It's in its 52nd year.
Did you have any memorable bosses, whether that be good or bad, throughout the jobs leading up to Rich Wrap? Did you have any memorable bosses, whether they be good bosses or bad bosses?
Well, I said this, Beth, over the course of my growing up, starting and actually started. I mentioned earlier that the basketball coach at Cornell was instrumental. He saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I've had that experience on 6 or 7 different times, and that someone has encouraged me. And the puzzlement I always had, I never ask, what is it that you see that you're encouraged about? And I still don't know for sure. I'd like to know that. But there was one man, the man that was Beth's father's friend. I went to work for him, and then I left and went to another company, and he hired me back to the printing company. So he was cooperative in helping me to get started in my business.
Very good. So, at what age were you guys married?
I was 20 when we got married, and Dick was 26.
Okay. And then how long till once Brett was born?
Pardon?
What age? How long after that until Brett was born?
Brett was born on our second anniversary.
Okay.
So in June, we will be married 63 years, and Brett would have been on that same day 61.
Okay. Okay. I guess going into children, did you always know you wanted kids?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know how many you wanted?
Well, I guess we must have wanted 6.
I think, in fairness, we never discussed it. I think in some respects, we never disclosed the size of the family, and but we certainly have no regrets. We had 6 children. They've all grown into adulthood. They all were finished college. They all are professional in one way or another.
We're very proud of all
Yes,
of them.
they themselves all have families, and as I say, this past weekend, as you know, we had they were gathered together here to celebrate my 90th birthday, and we had close to 30 people here. And as I mentioned, then one of the things that Beth and I are very happy about, our family enjoys each other. And they come together fairly often, and they thoroughly enjoy each other, and that makes us very happy.
Right, and not only do they enjoy each other, but there's a genuine love for each other's children. It's not just like my kids and your kids. They love all the kids, and the kids all love each other, which is such a wonderful gift for us. Now, Brett died 12 years ago almost, and he left 2 children who are now adults, and his widow, Mary Lynn, and she had a son named Jody. We are very close to Mary Lynn still, and to Jody and his wife and little baby River, and we're very close to Brett's adult children, Brandy and Brennan, and Brandy has a beautiful little girl named Hendrix, and they were all here for Grandpa's 90th birthday weekend extravaganza. It was just so filled with love and joy. It's hard to come down after it's over because it was just so great.
What do you guys remember changing about yourself and your life once you've had your first child?
Well, certainly, you can read all the books about babies and getting information about babies, but you really don't know anything until they say, "Here's your baby." And then it's like, when you walk out of the hospital, like, are they going to just let us go with this baby? And it's just mind-boggling when you realize that this little person is dependent on you for everything. And it was really, you feel your way, and it was, I don't want to say it's hard, but I felt inadequate at first. And but by the time we had Scott, I was a little less anxious about how to take care of a baby, certainly. And just the shock of how much time and effort and how much mental energy goes into having children, raising them.
Well, I'll try. I don't know that I had ever thought, always thought that after marriage there would be children.
Yeah.
But I never thought, we never put together any plans. When Brett came along, and when he was born, we had responsibility for a baby. And one of the things that both of us came from homes where family was important, and so we had that implanted in us very young. So that part came very easy.
Right.
Actually, I say, I went away to graduate school with, I don't know how we did it, but we had 2 children.
Brett was 2.
Yeah.
And Scott was 6 months.
2 and 6 months. We made it. Have we made mistakes with our children? Yeah,
Oh
I think
my
if we sat down with them, what would you say to us about? And they would have complaints. And on the other hand, I do believe that they all realized that they had a home. They were well cared for. They were encouraged. They were. By and large, they were good kids, but they were kids. They faced the same challenges growing up that we faced, and they handled them kind of the same way we did. Sometimes they did handle them well, sometimes they didn't handle them so well, but they all survived. And now, now they all have. I guess all of them do have children of their own.
Yeah.
And so we get to sit back now and watch how they deal with their children, and I'd have to say,
I think
we're very pleased. We're
really
very
good
pleased.
parents. Yeah.
We have of our 19 grandchildren. If you use the metric that qualifying for a driver's license is entering into adulthood, 18 of our 19 are in that doorway already, and our youngest, who's 13 almost. We just had a recent conversation, and I'm confident he wants to become a driver. So he's
Yeah.
He's got lots of good reasons to need it. So
I have to say, we loved our children so much, and what you don't realize when you have children is that they're always going to be on your mind. Always. You think, okay, when they leave home, get married, they won't be on your mind. So I think about them all the time. My kids are on my mind, and not every one of them every day, but it depends on what's going on in their lives and stuff. I'm very concerned with their lives. Not concerned because they're bad, but I want to encourage them and to be aware of their challenges, so I can be more specific in how I pray for them too. And we make it very clear to our grandchildren, as I've done to you, Hamilton, that we pray for you regularly. And that's an important part of my job, so to speak, now as a grandmother. I'm no longer parenting anyone, but I want to be the best support possible. And prayer is the major support that I have.
We feel blessed as grandparents that
Yes.
our grandchildren seem eager to come and spend time with us.
Yes. Oh,
And
so good.
that gives us an opportunity to have input into their lives based upon our experience, and to have just frank discussions. It's a delight that we have, and we made mistakes regularly, but as we look back, there's a number of things we'd like to have done different. But I think that's would have been the case anyway. You'd never get it perfect,
Right.
and just have to. We've hung in there, and and we're pleased with what we see as they've moved into adulthood, and we're pleased with we see how our grandchildren are moving into adulthood.
Right. We never once got up in the morning and said, "Today I think I'll screw up my kids." That doesn't enter your mind. But one of my prayers often is, "Lord, please heal the wounds I've caused." I don't know what they are necessarily, but I know they're there, and that's the best I can do about them.
Did you guys see your kind of parenting style or approach evolve with each kid? I take it that how Brett was raised was probably not the same as how Elizabeth was raised.
Exactly, yes. As the older children will say, Sarah and Elizabeth, who came 5 years after the youngest of the first four, they had many experiences and opportunities that the other kids didn't. And I mean, they went on a cruise with us, and they went to Hawaii with us, and the other kids didn't do those things. But I can't help birth order, and but they seem to be all very close.
Yeah. We well, here again, 6 children, and all 6 are different one from another.
Oh yeah.
And we weren't always able to understand that, and we be able to see how one is different from another and what their needs are different from another.
Yeah, I wish.
But
I
as
had
we
been...
as we look back, there's probably some scars in there. Some of them maybe even unhealed yet, for sure. But by and large, we're pleased with the outcome.
Would you say you were more strict with the older children than the younger?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would say so.
What, more stressed when they were younger?
Strict.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you know, if you go back at that time, the book, so-called books, stressed that, and I'm not sure even so sure that they weren't right. But times change and influence. You know, let's face it. Today, our children have access to so much more information than we ever did.
Yeah.
And how they process it is different. And yeah, we live in a different age. And
Our older children were quick to point out differences in how we raised Sarah and Elizabeth.
What do you think is the most important aspect to try and hit when raising a child? What's the parent's most
A
critical?
little louder.
What's the most important aspect to raising a child? What's the most important thing a parent has to do to successfully raise a kid?
I think you know what I was going to say.
I don't.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It was my heart's desire that they all would know Jesus. Without question, that was the most important thing to me. And that they get along, which they didn't always.
yeah.
But that was something I really yearned for, was them to all get along. And I'd have to say they didn't many times, but they seem to very much now.
yeah, they're all different. They're all individual.
Yeah.
But you know, I look back. You know, I didn't have any particular training to be a father.
No.
All learned as I went along, and there were times. I can remember instances where I didn't do the right thing. But
Me
we
too.
are pleased that in as they say, at this point, they all seem to care for each other. And I guess I can't ask for too much more than that. They're responsible, they're honest, they're hardworking,
Successful
they're thoughtful.
and
They
successful.
all our children and our grandchildren. Our grandchildren are a little bit young. Yeah, you guys haven't had the time to demonstrate, but they all. I've said they. I think they're all in a position to leave the world a better place when they entered it. A little bit better.
Do you
No
guys,
pressure.
I'm in the middle of some of that work right now. I'm making the world a little bit better with this document, with this interview. Do you guys have any fond memories of kind of raising the kids? Is there anything particular that you'll kind of cherish?
That we what?
Any particular memories you'll cherish, or maybe even traditions that you'll cherish?
Traditions. Well, Christmas.
It's always been a good one.
That was always fun. Trying to hide gifts from them. I tried all kinds of different things, like having a code to put on the gift tags that only I knew, so they didn't know whose were whose. Sometimes that didn't work out well because I could forget whose are, but I usually had it written down. But I've tried to keep it. I remember just the simple thing of always taking their picture on Christmas morning, sitting on the steps with the oldest down to the youngest. And that's something we always did. And that's not something that was done in my family. And I don't know exactly how we started it, but I always, they always thought of that as being part of it. Other traditions, well, it's not a tradition, but Dick's softball career was a major part of their childhoods, and you can talk more about that.
Well, we haven't talked about that much, but as a young 15-year-old, I started playing softball, fast pitch softball. It's a game that was popular in our little farm community. Anyway, that eventually led to I developed skill, got connected with teams. I literally have traveled the world playing softball, and it became for.
Well, mention the countries you've been in.
Yeah, I started playing what I'll call
Football.
Where I put a lot of time in when I was actually about 22, 23 years old. So all through the time, and I played until I was 52. So all the time our kids were growing up, I was playing softball. And they grew up, we often say they still probably have softball park dirt under their fingernails today. Because they all, for large, their summers were spent in a softball park. Yeah, I've been very blessed. I played all over the world where softball was played: Japan, New Zealand, the Philippines, Canada, Mexico, all across the United States, and that gave us opportunities to travel as a family. It was I often say Elizabeth, who was our youngest. I think she was at Disney World 5 times before she was 7. We used to make an annual softball trip to Clearwater, Florida, and we'd always stay over a couple of days and hit the Disney World. And I think by and large, I think they all have very fond memories of that. So it was a unique experience.
I remember softball was a 7-inning sport. And we sat in the bleachers, and the kids, there was a concession stand, and that was always a thing. They always wanted stuff. And I finally made a rule that they could have a snack in inning 2 and inning 5. So that settled a lot of issues. So when those innings came up, I'll tell you, they were right there with their hands out, ready to get money for the concessions.
Well, it was a major part of our life as a family, and the sponsorships of the teams were such that our family oftentimes traveled together away.
They would pay for.
Yeah, and the kids have fond memories. Actually, the boys, 2 boys, Scott and Brett, played. Brett became a very capable player, and so it's big time. It's been a big part of our life. And
Scott didn't play as much, but
no.
he did play.
But it was we have a lot of fond memories of it, and I was blessed to be able to play well, and as I say, travel places that I never would have dreamt that I'd ever get to. I often say I went to New Zealand. One thing I found, they have more sheep than people.
In Japan, the beds were too small.
Oh goodness.
Kind of getting into you guys' marriage. Once you were married, did you start to see a different side of your partner as time went on, or do you feel like you knew them pretty well by the time you kind of...
Oh, I think we continued to know each other. I don't think we'll ever fully know each other. I mean, just talking about childhood and stuff, I learned things that I hadn't heard before. And I'm sure you've had the same experience. And just seeing how we react to situations. I tend to get flustered or anxious. Dick is very even, and he could talk me off a cliff, and emotional cliff, that is. And he's a very calming influence on me during hard times. But we've learned that we each have a dark side, and we each have what you see.
Yeah.
And you learn to adjust, to forgive. Forgive is a huge thing. Yeah, for both of us.
Patience.
Yes. And but the one thing I think is more important than anything else in marriage is to maintain talking to each other. And not having... I feel so sorry when we go out for dinner and see another couple sitting there and just eating and not uttering a word to each other. And I noticed that even before I was married, and I thought, by golly, I don't want to be a couple like that. And
One thing about our marriage that I think is very unique is that we have, because of my work, literally, I ran my company from my home. We've been together for 63 years. I haven't gotten, it was no period in my life of any extent that I would get up in the morning and take off and I wouldn't get home till late evening.
Early on it was different.
There was some of that, but
yeah.
But we always ate meals together. Beth always
to my unhappiness. I wasn't always fond of cooking, but I had many years of enforced cooking for 8 people.
Yeah.
And now I don't like to cook at all, and I'll do anything to have carry out or go out.
And we're in a position where we can have a little bit of that.
Yeah.
But anyway, no, I would have to say that there were tough times. There were certainly tough times, but I think both of us were committed to making the marriage work, and we had patience with one another. It's interesting now as we're in retirement. For me, because I tend to be quiet anyway, it's not as big a deal. It's hard for Beth because she needs to be with people, and she does very well with people. But in this day and age, it's you have to force yourself to get out of the house sometimes.
Yeah.
And we go to the gym. We try to go to the gym 3 days a week still, but we can talk ourselves out of that pretty easy.
I hear you on that.
Especially me. Sometimes he's dragging me out the door, like, okay, I'll go. But I'm never unhappy that I went. My happiest time at the gym is leaving. One thing about marriage, too, we have never stopped saying, I love you. And I think it's important. It doesn't have to be rigid or anything, but every night before I go to bed, I tell him I love him, and he'll say it back. And just saying that, I think saying that creates love. I really do. And love definitely grows, and you become... I think real happiness can be when you're together saying nothing and being content. And then other times we talk. I'd have to say we have a very comfortable love. And I would say that rather than saying, oh, we've been happily married for 63 years, that would be ridiculous because nobody's happy all the time. How I describe our marriage is successful. We have had a successful marriage and continue to. I don't see divorce on the horizon.
Especially with 65 just around the corner, you gotta hit that.
Right, we just couldn't do it.
How important do you think community is
A
in?
little louder.
How important do you think community is in facilitating a marriage?
I still can't hear you.
Community.
How important do you think community is in facilitating a marriage, in creating a successful marriage?
Yes, very important. And our community, by and large, over the years, has been church. And it has been a big, important part of our. Most of our friends, other than softball friends, were church friends. And we were always part of groups at church. And still now, we've been in the same, we call it a care group. There are 15 of us together. One of them is a widow. Well, actually, there's 2 widows. But anyway, it's a group that's about 15. And we get together twice a month, once for a regular meeting where we discuss things and pray for one another, or we give prayer requests. And the other time is a social outing. Like most recently, we went to a Chinese restaurant. Another time we went to a pizza restaurant. Another time we went to a Mexican restaurant. And we're hoping that it's going to work out in the month of July for the whole group to go to the farm, because everybody wants to see the farm, and Dana has offered to make lunch for us. So we're hoping we can get that worked out.
Well, I think, at the very basic thing, one of the values of church is community, builds community, gives you a reason, and the opposite of community is loneliness, and that speaks for itself. Loneliness is not good. No, and by the way, we have community in our family.
Yes.
And yeah, being with other people has, for the most part, nothing but good results.
Right. It's. I think it's vital to happiness. Is to have friends.
I think we were built to have community. I think we were built to be together.
Yeah.
Did what you look in a friend kind of evolve? Did the qualities you look for in a friend or in people in your community, did that change as you grew older, or maybe after you had children? Or maybe even just like who was available to be friends?
I think for many years we had close friends that were parents of children. The Poles family who grew up across the street from us were very close friends.
A large group of our friends were our neighbors.
Yes, in Oak Openings.
And the other thing, large group of our friends were people who had children who were friends of our children.
Right. I remember introducing myself to a gal one time. We were at some kind of we were in the local park for something, and her name is Jerry Rink, and her husband was one of the kids' teachers. And I had heard that they had 6 children, and I had never met her. And she was sitting on a blanket with their youngest child. And I remember going over to her and sitting on the blanket and saying, I have just wanted to meet you because I know you have 6 children and so do we. And that was the beginning of our friendship. And she ended up working for our company for years and years. Yeah. And then when the girls were dating in high school, when Linda and Dana were in high school, they happened to date brothers. Dana married her Gould. Linda did not. And but we became friends of the Goulds, and that was an important friendship too. Still is.
Yeah, I think Well, I would have to say without a doubt, we had our friendship group at church, which came from that set,
Right.
and then we had a large group of friends that came from children relationships.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd say that even to this day, we still enjoy being with one another.
Yeah, we go out with the poles.
As you get older, it's not as easy, but
Yeah, we've maintained.
obviously, I think I would, anybody that would try to argue that friendships, community, getting together with one another is not important is missing something.
Well, Chris's mother, Sandy Gould, worked for Dick for how many years?
20 years.
20 years. And she's so kind. She always told people that she couldn't imagine any better boss than Dick Brubaker.
But
All right, we'll get in one question from kind of the older age, and I don't know if it's going to be the funnest one, but what's one of the hardest things about growing old?
You've got to talk a little louder, please, for me.
what is the hardest thing about growing old?
Okay, are we on?
Yeah, we're on.
Okay. The hardest thing about growing old is seeing friends die. There's several things. Having friends die, or friends have dementia or Alzheimer's or some kind of mental lack, for lack of a better word. Also, I kind of hurt all over. I have a lot of aches and pains. And I'm noticing a lot in the last couple days because we haven't been to the gym. And I've been sitting a lot. And I really am having trouble walking without pain. One of my saddest things is that Dick and I used to do a lot of bike trips, a lot of biking. And we can't anymore. It's just not safe. I think if I could, I would get a 3-wheel bike, and one that is electric or not. You could use it either way. That's something I'd like to consider. They're expensive, and I'd want us both to have them. But that's something is a big loss for both of us. Although we enjoy our memories of our trips and do talk about those, and sometimes we'll drive old bike routes and just reminisce about them. So go ahead.
Well, I think what I've often said is that you kind of systematically lose abilities that you used to have, and she meant, for instance, and the new things that crop up aren't necessarily fun. Like, for instance, we don't have as much energy as we used to have.
No, not at all.
But the biggest problem, and I think the other thing of it is that because you don't have pre-programmed, so to speak, places to go, it's very easy for you to get reclusive.
Especially me.
And we fight that a lot. I mean, we can talk ourselves into staying here rather than going out pretty easily. And then there's there's always reoccurring health issues that are associated with getting older. And I probably have been in doctor's offices more in the last couple of years than maybe the previous 10 years. But it's all part of it. But you lose capabilities. And now mentally, we've been fortunate. Mentally,
yes.
we've been able to attain our mental alertness and have no problem. We enjoy reading. We can.
I think that helps, is the reading and doing crossword puzzles, or I like word games. I play Wordle every day, and
But for instance, Beth has she has to have if she were to go out and walk anywhere, she needs a cane. Now, in my case,
distance.
It's almost any time an older person goes to a doctor, one of the first questions, have you fallen lately?
Yes.
Now, I have fortunate. I don't have any. I can't remember a single time when I've fallen accidentally, but
rather than purposely.
we've witnessed some of our friends where their health issues have been much more restrictive than ours. We've been very fortunate. We're both mentally alert. We're both basically have good health for our age. Mm-hmm. We have interests, but you need to keep moving. My primary care doctor, who retired recently, but who I've been seeing for 40 years. One of his last recommendations was he says you better keep moving, because if you don't, you won't be able to move. So, but we have to push ourselves sometimes to get up and move.
Right. I can be very sedentary, and it's not in my best interest at all. So.
Is there anything really good about growing old?
Anything good?
Yes.
About
growing old. Is there anything good about growing old?
Well, it's associated with growing old. We're immensely enjoying our adult grandchildren, like you right now, doing this. We're just so blessed to have you want to do this. And we enjoy having them come and chat with us. And some of them are very forthcoming and just offer up almost anything about themselves. And that has been a real blessing. And just observing them, seeing them get married. Like Kelsey's going to get married this summer. Vanessa's already married. Jody's getting married in September. And Jace is getting married in September, yes, also. And who else is married? Nobody is at this point.
But in some sense, is be able to sit back and watch them without having no direct responsibility.
Yes, yes.
The right amount of distance.
Right.
But no, it's been fun watching the grandkids grow up.
Yeah, for sure. Sometimes you want to offer information, but it's best to have them ask for some.
Is there anything that you wish you'd done when you were younger, now that you're older?
Wished would have done?
Yes.
About that.
I've never.
I suppose if I thought real hard, there's much, but I can't. I kind of took life day by day, and I didn't have any big plans. Some people do, and I didn't.
You don't have a bucket list.
Don't have a bucket list. I've had an opportunity to do far more than I would have ever imagined as a young man. I've traveled places that I would just do. I wouldn't even think about going to a place like Japan.
Well, we did.
Yeah, we did.
When Linda lived there.
I can remember. I remember. Reading about how it never gets dark in the north in the wintertime. I actually experienced that. I was playing ball in Edmonton. Canada, and we were playing a softball game at 10:30 at night, and the lights weren't even on, and I didn't realize that until all of a sudden I stopped and said, "Oh, the lights aren't on." So anyway, so I've been able to see a lot of things that I didn't imagine that I'd ever see.
One thing I would like to see, and I suppose we basically still have a chance, I would love to see the Northern Lights. Just seeing them, on TV and things like that, they're beautiful, but I think that would be a wonderful thing to observe. But travel itself is getting hard for us.
Yes.
Just getting through airports is difficult, and Plane trips, if they're long, they're
Arduous.
especially uncomfortable for Dick because he's so tall. And yeah, that's how, but now that we have the time to travel, we don't necessarily have the effort or the energy. I knew it was an E word, an energy to travel. And we've talked about taking a Viking cruise, and we might sometime. We'll see.
I have two places I would like to see: the Normandy beachhead in France.
Yes.
And I was fortunate enough when I took a softball trip to the Philippines. I got to see the Pacific Cemetery, Pacific World War II Pacific Cemetery. I'd like to see, as my understanding, there's one in Normandy. I'd like to see that.
We saw the one in Arlington.
Yeah, and then I read a book about Amsterdam. I'm really curious to go to see Amsterdam and how they handled their water flooding problem. Be interesting to see. And I suppose if I thought about it, there'd be several places I wouldn't mind seeing. But
I'd like to see the tulip fields in the Netherlands. But we'll see what we do in the future.
See.
Right now, we're happy to visit our kids.
I mean, maybe for part 2 of an interview series.
yes.
Right, okay. Travels. You could travel with us and video.
Okay. We're gonna
profession.
go. I find my job.
Work for National Geographic.
I'm taking Beth out in the wild. I guess, yeah. So if as we're kind of capping this, I think I do kind of want to leave it on the question of what are some of your favorite quotes or sayings, your favorite Bethisms and Dickisms. As I would, and if there's any stories you want to share relating to those.
Well, yes, that one involves you quite a bit. One of the times we visited in Longmont, we were walking from church to go out to eat, and you were a freshman in college. And I was walking with you, and I said, "Well, how are you liking school?" And you said, "Yeah, thought you were gonna like it." And I said, "How about your living situation?" And you said, "Well, my dorm room needs some posters or something because the walls are bare." And it wasn't too long after that I had the idea that it would be very funny if I would send you a poster size picture of Grandpa and I, which we did. And I didn't know what you would think of it, but you immediately put it up, and it caused quite a stir in your dorm. And another funny thing about that is we sent the poster, and your mom always supplied you with a jar of hot cocoa mix that was a mixture of different things, and it was just powder. And someone came into your room one time and said, "Who are those people?" And you said, "Well, those are my grandparents." So you pick up the jar of hot chocolate mix and said, "And these are their ashes." And I guess even after you were going to graduate, somebody else wanted the picture to put up in their dorm. Was it a couple of girls that?
It was all the girls from my dorm.
Yes.
They moved into a house, and I think on the last day, as everyone was moving out, I gave them the poster, kind of as a joke, in a similar way that you gave it to me, and then they took it and hung it up on their house for an entire year.
So our poster has made the rounds. Who knows who has it now?
Yeah.
But that was a fun thing that we did. And we had the perfect opening with you saying you wanted posters, so that was a fun thing to do.
Do you have any favorite quotes?
One that I really thought was quite interesting is attributed to Einstein. Someone asked him, "How can I make my children brilliant?" And he is attributed with saying, "If you want your children to be be brilliant, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be more brilliant, read them more fairy tales. And I have to say there's a lot of wisdom in that. Well, obviously Einstein, but it creates a sense of wonder, and it creates a sense of what could be, imagination, because you have to. When I grew up, there was no videos and things like that, but you get pictures in your mind, and I think that's a valuable thing to be able to do, is visualize. And so that's why I started reading nursery rhymes to Sullivan. And recently, I actually, it was at Grandpa's dinner. I was sitting across the street, across the table from Annika, who is 15 years old. And I was asking her, I said, have you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia? And she said, no. But she said she wanted to. And I said, well, I'd be happy to read them to you. And she said, yes, she would love that. So I hope she meant it. And I will make a point to be able to go over and read one of the books.
Well, of course, there is one quotation that I think all of your mom would probably know, all of our children would know. I can picture the meeting. It was in New York City. It was in the offices of a company, an industrial design firm, Lippincott in Margulies, and the Mr. Lippincott was making a presentation, and I can still see him standing in the corner, and he gave the definition of communications. And he said communications is the constant and consistent repetition of the same visual and verbal elements. And I would think that all of our children could quote that to you, because
and it's a perfect.
It just hit me as being, anyway. That they probably know that one.
And I think it is good because it applies to Scripture, because the Bible is constant and consistent repetition of the same verbal elements, but you can create pictures in your mind once again. So.